Picture a beach in the year 1190 outside a city under siege. The city is Acre on the coast of the Holy Land, and the siege has dragged on so long that disease is killing more men than the fighting is. On that beach, a handful of German merchants drag a wrecked ship out of the surf, stretch its sail into a makeshift tent, and begin caring for the sick and the dying that no one else will touch. That tent is the beginning of everything. Over the next 300 years, those volunteer nurses will transform into something the world had never seen before and has never quite seen since. Not simply an army of monks who swore vows of poverty and then went to war, but an entire country. A state ruled by warrior priests in white cloaks, stretching for hundreds of miles along the Baltic coast, richer and better organized than most of the kingdoms around it. And then they will lose all of it in a single summer afternoon on a field the Germans call Tannenberg and the Poles call Grunwald. But here is the strange part. Losing didn't kill them. Being conquered didn't kill them. Even their own leader dissolving the whole thing and kneeling to their greatest enemy didn't kill them. Kings tried to erase them, Napoleon tried, Hitler tried, and they are still here. This is the story of how a battlefield charity became an empire, lost the only reason it existed, and outlived every single person who tried to destroy it. This is the 800-year story of the Teutonic Knights. Chapter 1. A hospital at the edge of the world. To understand where they ended up, you have to start with what they were at the very beginning. And at the beginning, they were not knights. They were nurses. There had already been a German hospital in Jerusalem decades earlier, set up to care for German-speaking pilgrims who arrived in the Holy Land and found they couldn't understand a word the French and Italian Crusaders were saying. That hospital was lost when Jerusalem fell in 1187. But the idea survived. And during the long, miserable siege of Acre, merchants from the German cities of Bremen and Lübeck revived it, building that field hospital on the beach for their sick and wounded countrymen. When Acre finally fell to the Crusaders in 1191, the Brotherhood was rewarded with a permanent home inside the city. And then, in 1198, it was upgraded. No longer just a charity that cared for the sick, it became a full military religious order built on the model of the famous Knights Templar. These were now monks who took holy vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and who also, when required, put on armor and killed people. To the modern ear, that combination sounds impossible. In the 12th century, it was one of the most respected callings a nobleman could answer. The man who turned this small outfit into a real power was named Hermann von Salza. He became the Order's Grand Master around the year 1210, and he was less a warrior than a diplomat of genius. His masterstroke was to make himself indispensable to the single most powerful man in Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. Frederick rewarded him lavishly, even elevating him to the rank of Prince of the Empire, which meant the head of this little order could now negotiate with kings as an equal. How small was it, really, in the early days? The order's own chronicler, writing a century later, claimed that when von Salza took charge, the whole order could put just 10 knights in the field. Whether that number is literally true or just a storyteller's way of showing how far they had come, the point lands either way. This was a minor player that a brilliant man turned into a heavyweight. Because the truth is, in the Holy Land, the Teutonic Knights were always the third wheel. They were never as rich, never as powerful, and never as influential as the Templars and the Hospitallers who had gotten there first. And the Crusader states were dying. At a battle called La Forbie, near Gaza, in 1244, the Teutonic contingent was, according to one chronicle, almost completely wiped out, with only a handful of men walking away alive. When Acre itself, the order's birthplace, finally fell in 1291, the whole Crusader project in the Holy Land was over, and the order retreated to Venice with no obvious future. Von Salza, though, had already seen the way out. His genius wasn't just diplomacy. It was realizing that the order's future didn't lie in the crowded losing fight for Jerusalem. It lay somewhere they could stop being the third wheel and start being the main event. That somewhere was in the cold forests of the north. Chapter 2. The country that shouldn't exist. This is the hinge on which the entire story turns. Off to the northeast of the German lands, a Polish duke named Conrad of Masovia had a problem. His borders were being raided relentlessly by a pagan people called the Old Prussians. Now, one thing to get straight right away, because it confuses almost everyone. These Old Prussians were not Germans. They were a Baltic people, cousins of the Lithuanians and the Latvians, with their own language and their own gods. And they have almost nothing to do with the later German Prussia of Frederick the Great and the spiked helmets. That name gets recycled onto a completely different people. Hold that thought, because it matters. Around the year 1226, Duke Conrad invited the Teutonic Knights to come and deal with his pagan raiders, offering them a stretch of borderland as a base to operate from. And here, Hermann von Salza did the shrewdest thing of his whole career. Before a single knight marched, he went to Emperor Frederick II and secured a document granting the order the right not just to fight in Prussia, but to keep and rule everything it conquered as its own sovereign land. The knights arrived as a hired sword, but thanks to that piece of paper, they stayed as the landlord. What followed was not quick, and it was not gentle. The conquest of Prussia took more than 50 years of grinding, brutal warfare. Prussians who accepted Christian baptism could be spared. Those who refused were subjugated, driven out, or killed. The fighting was savage on both sides. There are accounts of captured knights being burned alive inside their own armor as sacrifices to the pagan gods. And the native people did not go quietly. They rose up again and again, most fiercely in a great uprising led by a Prussian nobleman named Hercus Monte, who remains, to this day, a folk hero of native resistance. In the middle of all this, in 1237, the order absorbed another crusading order to its north, the Brothers of the Sword, inheriting a second front in what is now Latvia and Estonia. And it's on that northern front that one of the most famous episodes in the whole saga takes place. In 1242, on the frozen surface of a lake called Peipus, a Crusader army was defeated by the Russian prince Alexander Nevsky. You may know it as the Battle on the Ice. And here we have to stop and be honest, because almost everything you think you know about that battle is wrong. The image everyone carries of armored knights crashing through cracking ice and drowning in the freezing water below is not in any of the early sources. It was invented almost 800 years later for a Soviet film made in 1938. The battle was real, and it was a genuine defeat, but it was much smaller than the legend claims. Its exact location is still uncertain, and the knights who fought there were mostly not even the main Teutonic order. It was a mixed coalition led by a crusading bishop with only a small contingent from the order's northern branch. Alexander Nevsky became a Russian national hero and a saint. The Drowning Knights became a movie. Keep the two apart, and that points at something you need to carry through this entire video. Our richest source for the conquest of Prussia is a chronicle written by a priest of the order named Peter of Dusburg. finished in 1326. It is a wonderful, detailed source. It is also propaganda. It was written a full century after the events, commissioned by a Grand Master for the explicit purpose of making the conquest look holy. When it describes the pagan Prussians worshipping toads and tending sacred flames in the forest, that is not neutral reporting. That is the enemy writing the enemy's story. Good history here means never taking any one side's word for it. Whatever the cost, the order won. Out of the conquered land, it built a state. It founded towns and cities, invited in waves of German, Dutch, and Polish settlers, and administered the whole thing like a corporation with an army. In 1309, the Grand Master moved the Order's capital north into the heart of this new country to a colossal riverside fortress called Marienburg. The order of monk nurses from a beach in the Holy Land now ran a nation. Chapter 3. The Crusade you could book like a holiday. For most of the 1300s, business was very good. That fortress capital, Marienburg, known today as Malbork in Poland, is still standing, and it is still the largest brick castle in the entire world. From behind its walls, the Order ran a prosperous, well-oiled state, and it had one enemy left to justify its existence, the last major pagan power in Europe, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Fighting Lithuania became an annual event, and the Order turned it into something genuinely bizarre and genuinely brilliant. It marketed the war, in effect, as a crusading holiday. Germans called these seasonal campaigns the Reisen, the journeys, and every year, noblemen from all across Europe, from England, from France, from Scotland, would travel to Prussia to join in. They came to fight pagans, to win prestige, and to go home with war stories. For the Order, it was perfect. The guests brought their own weapons and armor, which meant the Order didn't have to pay for an army. In return, the visitors got the full package. Guaranteed fighting against the heathen, grand feasts, a ceremonial table of honor where the most distinguished guest crusaders were seated with great ceremony. Between campaigns, you could even tour the holy sites. It was, in a very real sense, medieval dark tourism, luxurious and pious and violent all at once. And the guest list was spectacular. The future King Henry IV of England came to campaign against Lithuania as a young lord more than once. When the poet Geoffrey Chaucer wanted to describe the perfect, ideal knight in his most famous work, he wrote that this knight had gone campaigning in Prussia. His audience would have understood instantly. Going to Prussia to raid the pagans was a rite of passage for the elite of Europe. But there was a fatal flaw sitting right at the center of the whole enterprise. The Order's entire legal reason to exist, the one thing that made its wars holy rather than just wars, was that it fought pagans. And in 1386, the pagans ran out. In that year, the Grand Duke of Lithuania, a man named Jogaila, accepted Christian baptism. He married the young Queen of Poland, Jadwiga, took the crown himself as King Władysław Jagiello, and fused Poland and Lithuania into a single, enormous Christian power, sitting directly on the Order's doorstep. Think about what that did. Overnight, the last pagans in the neighborhood became Christians. The Order's holy war against Lithuania was now simply a war between Christian states. The guests stopped coming with such easy consciences. The Pope started asking difficult questions. The entire moral engine that had powered the Order for a century and a half had just switched off. And the Order kept fighting anyway. That decision to keep marching against a Christian kingdom as if nothing had changed is the beginning of the end. Chapter 4. The day it all broke. On the 15th of July, in the year 1410, the reckoning came. The Order's field army met the combined forces of Poland and Lithuania near 3 small villages in the Order's own territory. And this battle has 3 names, which tells you everything about how contested it still is. The Germans call it Tannenberg, the Poles call it Grunwald, the Lithuanians call it Zalgiris. By any name, it was one of the largest battles in all of medieval Europe. Now, a warning, because this is exactly where popular history goes off the rails. You will see enormous, confident, precise numbers thrown around for this battle. Be skeptical. The surviving sources contradict each other, and serious historians genuinely disagree. The best modern estimates put the Polish and Lithuanian army somewhere between 30,000 and 40,000 men, with the Order's forces meaningfully smaller. But the honest answer is that we do not know the exact figures, and the casualty counts in the old chronicles are almost certainly inflated. Don't trust the decimal points. There is a famous story about the morning of the battle. According to a Polish chronicle written decades later, the Grand Master's heralds rode out to the Polish and Lithuanian kings and contemptuously delivered 2 bare swords, a sneering invitation to fight if they had the courage for it. The Poles took it as an insult and an omen, and they won. Those 2 swords became a Polish national symbol. Just remember, that scene comes from one side, written long after the fact. It's a wonderful story. It may also be exactly that, a story. What we can say is that the battle was fought in blazing summer heat. At one point, the Lithuanian wing fell back, and historians still argue about whether that was a genuine collapse or a deliberate feigned retreat designed to pull the knights out of position. Either way, the Allied armies enveloped the Order's forces and crushed them. The Grand Master, Ulrich von Jungingen, was killed on the field, and most of the Order's senior leadership died with him. It should have been the end. It very nearly was. The only reason it wasn't is a single officer named Heinrich von Plauen, who raced back to the capital, Marienburg, and held that great fortress through the siege that followed. The Order survived, but the aura of invincibility was gone forever. In the enemy's capital of Krakow, captured banners of the Teutonic Knights were hung up in the cathedral as trophies. From there, it was a long slide. A brutal 13-year war against Poland from 1454 to 1466 ended in a treaty that cut the Order's state in half. It lost its western territory, including the mighty capital at Marienburg itself and the great port city of Danzig, which we now call Gdansk. Worse, the Order now held what remained not as a sovereign power, but as a vassal, kneeling to the King of Poland for its own land. And then comes the final irony, the one that is almost too perfect to be true. By the 1520s, the Grand Master was a man named Albert of Brandenburg-Ansbach. He was, awkwardly, related by blood to the very King of Poland he answered to. He was broke, he was losing, and he was out of options. And around this time he sought the advice of a rebellious monk who was, at that exact moment, tearing Western Christianity in 2. His name was Martin Luther. And Luther gave him a piece of advice that was breathtaking in its audacity. Dissolve the Order. Take the land for yourself. Make it a normal, secular, hereditary duchy. So he did. In 1525, in the market square of Krakow, Albert of Brandenburg-Ansbach, converted to Luther's new Protestant faith, dissolved the Order's rule in Prussia and knelt before the King of Poland to receive his old Crusader state back, this time as its first secular duke. The Catholic military order that had waged holy war against Poland for nearly 3 centuries came to its end in Prussia as a Protestant nobleman bowing to the Polish crown. and the state he created, Ducal Prussia, became the first officially Protestant state in the world. A few decades later, in 1561, the order's remaining northern branch did the very same thing and simply dissolved itself into a duchy too. The Crusader kingdom was gone, but here is the thing almost everyone gets wrong. The order was not. Chapter 5. The Order That Wouldn't Die. Losing Prussia should have been the end of the story. It was not, and the belief that it was is one of the most common mistakes people make about the Teutonic Knights. Because the order was never only in Prussia. It had held estates and branches scattered across the Holy Roman Empire the entire time. So when Prussia was lost, those German branches simply carried on. They combined their leadership under a single head, moved the headquarters to a town in southern Germany called Mergentheim, and kept going. For nearly 3 more centuries, the order lived on as a Catholic aristocratic institution, its members fighting in the emperor's wars against the Ottoman Turks, managing their lands, quietly persisting. Then came Napoleon. In 1809, sweeping away the old order of Europe, he dissolved the Teutonic order across his German client states and stripped away its lands. This time, it survived only because the Habsburg emperors of Austria kept it alive under their protection. In 1834, the Austrian emperor reorganized it, and over the following century, it finally, completely set down the sword. In 1929, the Teutonic Order was formally refounded as what it remains today, a purely religious order. Priests and nuns. The knights, at long last, were gone. Which brings us to the single strangest chapter in the order's long afterlife. When the Nazis came to power, they were obsessed with the medieval Teutonic Knights. In their propaganda, the Knights became the heroic forerunners of Germany's drive to conquer land in the East, to seize what the Nazis called living space. Heinrich Himmler fantasized about his SS as a reborn order of knights. The regime even named its elite party training academies Order Castles in direct homage. And yet, despite glorifying the medieval knights at every turn, the Nazis outlawed the actual living Teutonic order in 1938 and persecuted its members. Why? Because Hitler and Himmler deeply distrusted Catholic religious orders, seeing them as agents of the Pope in Rome and therefore as a threat. It's one of the most revealing contradictions in the whole regime. They wanted the costume, the banners, the myth of the noble crusader. They had no use whatsoever for the real thing, a small community of Catholic priests and nuns who tended the sick. After the war, the order was restored, and it returned to what it had been at the very beginning, on that beach at Acre, caring for people. Today, its headquarters is in Vienna. Its current Grand Master is a man named Father Frank Bayard, who worked as a business manager before he became a priest, was elected to lead the order in 2018 and was re-elected again in 2026. Under him, roughly 1,000 members, priests, nuns, and lay associates run hospitals, care homes, and schools across Central Europe. And the whole 800-year journey is captured in 3 words. The medieval motto of the Teutonic Order was, help, defend, heal. The modern order dropped the word in the middle. Today it is simply help and heal. The sword is gone. The hospital remains. So, why does any of this matter? Why should you care about an order of medieval monks most people have never heard of? First, because it is one of the greatest survival stories in all of history. Here is an institution that was founded to nurse the sick, reinvented itself as an army, then as a country, dissolved itself into a duchy, and finally circled all the way back to nursing the sick again. Most organizations die the moment their reason for existing disappears. This one just kept changing shape for more than 800 years. Second, because these forgotten wars in the cold north quietly built the Europe we know. They redrew the map of the entire Baltic, they erased whole peoples and languages, and through the accident of one Grandmaster's surrender, they planted the seed that would grow into the Kingdom of Prussia, and eventually into modern Germany itself. The ancestor of one of Europe's great powers was a secularized Crusader monastery. And third, maybe most useful of all, the Teutonic Knights are a case study in how history gets used as a weapon. The very same white-cloaked knights were noble pioneers to German nationalists, brutal oppressors to Poles and Russians, movie villains to the Soviets, and heroic ancestors to the Nazis, who then turned around and banned the real thing. Every single generation rewrote them to fight its own battles. The knights themselves have been dead for centuries. But the fight over what they meant has never really ended. And learning to tell the difference between the history and the myth painted over it, that isn't just a skill for the Middle Ages, it's a skill for right now. Thank you for watching Octerra. If you enjoyed this story about the Teutonic Order, then please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. There are many more hidden histories like this one, waiting to be uncovered. I'll see you at the next.